title that'll allow me to get an audio level. And we'll start with Justice Cooper.
Okay, my name is Candace Cooper, and I am currently retired. I was the presiding justice of Division 8 of the California Court of Appeal, 2nd Appellate District.
Justice Todd.
And I am Catherine Doy Todd. I sit in the 2nd District in Division 2. Today, can I start with you?
Give me just a second.
Okay.
Here. I just want to move my camera a little bit.
I have a little blurb to start it off.
Okay.
What day it is and what we're doing.
All right, and we are ready to go.
Today is June 23rd, 2009, and this is an interview of Justice Candace Cooper, recently retired from the Court of Appeal. This is part of the Appellate Court Legacy Project, creating an oral history of the court. I am Catherine Doy Todd, and I had the pleasure of joining Justice Cooper in Division 2 of the 2nd District before she was appointed presiding justice of Division 8. So, Candy, you were born in Los Angeles on November 23rd, 1948. Tell me about your parents and about your siblings and your family life growing up.
Okay. I was born in Los Angeles, Queen of Angels Hospital, I understand. My parents are both deceased. My father's name was Cornelius Cooper, and for the majority of my life he was a member of Los Angeles Police Department. Then when I was in college, he retired from LAPD and joined the Justice Department, where he had a second career.
Well, when you were young, was he one of just a few black officers
Yes.
in LAPD?
Yes. He was a contemporary of a man named Jess Brewer, who became one of the first very high-ranking black members of LAPD, a little bit younger than Tom Bradley when he was on the police force. Most of the early African-American lawyers, male lawyers in Los Angeles, a lot of them were LAPD officers.
And a few of the
retired.
judges weren't there?
Yes, yes, a few of the judges as well. My dad was also a contemporary. One of our judges that a lot of people remember from Superior Court was David Cunningham. Not that we have a new David Cunningham, who's also a judge now, but my dad and him had been in kindergarten together. My dad was also born and raised in Los Angeles.
And had Dave Cunningham Sr. been on the LA Police Department?
That I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember him, but a good number of the black judges were ex-LAPD officers.
And what about your mother? Did she work or?
My mother was primarily a housewife. She would work from time to time as economics indicated that she needed to get out and do more assistance. She sold insurance for a few years, and however, her best job when I was in high school is she became a reservation agent for Trans World Airlines.
Oh, so did that mean you got access to travel?
At that time, you could, we didn't get passes because we weren't, I think the spouse could get a pass, but we could pay the tax and fly anywhere TWA went.
Oh.
So if I had a 3-day weekend, I was gone.
Oh.
So I did a lot of traveling in those days.
At what age were you starting to travel like that?
This was in high school and the end of high school and college, undergraduate.
So what were some of the places that you visited?
Well, mostly actually at that time I was going back and forth to Germany because there was a very good German family that my family was very close to, and they had a lot of children and several homes, and so we would go there. So I would go to Berlin, or was then West Berlin, or northern Germany, or they also had a country home in southern part of Germany. So it was,
what a wonderful
that was fun.
experience for
Yeah,
you.
that was
So
fun.
did you get to learn any German at that time?
I never studied it, but we would be there for long enough. My whole family would go. My brother was also friends. My younger sister was friends with this family as well, and you'd go and you'd stay for several months because they were very, very accommodating people, and they had a lot of kids as well. And I must say, after 2 or 3 years of those kinds of visits, I got conversational. So I could carry on a routine conversation, and I could understand a lot unless they started talking, politics or religion or something with more sophisticated, and then I'd lose it.
So you have a couple of brothers, don't you?
I have. I'm in birth order. I am number 2 of 4. It was boy, girl, boy, girl. My older brother, Cornelius, is a medical doctor. He lives in New York City in Manhattan. I have a younger brother. My older brother's a year older than me. I have a younger brother, he's 5 years younger, lives here in Los Angeles. His name is Conrad, and he is a preeminent swim instructor. He teaches hundreds of kids each summer to swim, and then takes the winter off. And he loves his life.
And you have a
As you might
sister as
imagine.
well.
And the youngest sibling is my sister Crystal, who's 8 years younger than me, and she lives in LA and is raising with her partner 2 beautiful adopted children.
All of your names begin with C.
Yes.
And I heard that your father's name was
Cornelius
Cornelius. And
also.
what about your mother? Did she have a name that began with C as well?
She did not. She was fairly close in the alphabet. Her name was Eunice Cooper, but I don't know why they got stuck with the CCs, but everybody started with C.
So you were born in Los Angeles. You've basically spent most of your life in Los Angeles, haven't you?
I did. We did a lot of traveling. My father was, I was born in '48. And basically, elementary school years was in the '50s, and college years, high school years in the '60s. But in those elementary school years, that was back in the day where gas was 10 or 15 cents a gallon, and it was see the USA in your Chevrolet. And we had a series of station wagons, and cops don't have a lot of money for hotels, so he'd pile us all in the car, and we would go all over. I probably went to many states, almost all of the national parks, and we would camp and drive around, and that was how we vacationed. And so we got to see a lot.
You were very fortunate. You had a close family, and I know that when I was first on Division II, you had your mother with you, and you took care of her in the last years of her life.
Yeah, she lived with me. In fact, the home that I'm in now, I purchased a larger home so she could come and stay with myself and my daughter. And so yeah, she attended my enrobing into the second to Division II, and then again she made it. She wasn't well, but she made it for Division VIII also.
She must have been very proud of you.
Yes, yes.
So when did your father pass away? Were you already a judge, or did he?
I had been a judge for 2 years.
So he knew about that.
He knew about it. My dad, actually it was longer than I think about it. I'm sort of losing these dates. My dad passed away in 1985 at the age of 62, which was way too young.
Yeah, way too young.
Yeah, way too young. But I was appointed to the Muni Court in 1980, so he did get to know, one, I had become a lawyer, and also that I had become a judge.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So yeah,
he must have been very proud of you.
He was.
And your mother as well.
Yes.
But your whole family sounds so accomplished.
Well, we are that generation that basically jumped into an educated generation. My father's family was interesting because the generation before his, there were some college-educated people in that generation. His father was an AME minister and came to California around the turn of the century to open a church, and actually pastored a church in Pasadena, that historically well-known church out there. And then was transferred to San Francisco and passed away when my father, who was the youngest of 4, was only 2.
I see.
And
So then where did your father grow up?
he grew up, they came back to Los Angeles, and he grew up in Los Angeles. Went to Jefferson High School here in LA. And, but as a result of losing his father when he was only 2 years old, and his mother being in California, this is then back in the early 20s, had no support and no relatives on the West Coast. So he then had a much tougher upbringing.
From a very young age.
And so my dad and his siblings, he was one of 4 there were no college graduates in that generation. And they lost track of his father's family and his mother's family pretty much as well, because communication travel back in the 20s and 30s isn't what it was these days. So
it's interesting how much of an impact economics had on their life and their whole life.
yeah, I think it's really a testament to education, and you can do a great deal without it, but it certainly is not an assurance, and you can do a heck of a lot better if you do have the economic, the educational credentials. Because my dad ultimately did pretty well. He went as far as he could in the Los Angeles Police Department, but he retired from LAPD. I'd say it must have been around 67 or 68, because he had risen basically as far as you could go as an African-American officer in the LAPD at that time. It was very difficult to get above sergeant, and he had made that level, but you would only be assigned to predominantly African-American areas, and there were a lot of restrictions. So he left LAPD and went with the Justice Department in a program called Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, that at that time was giving out block grants, federal money, to local and state law enforcement agencies and other educational institutions, and in fact partially funded one of the first California Judicial colleges.
Oh my goodness.
It was funded through
It's
in part.
a small world.
It's a very small world, yeah.
So,
but I was very proud of him, I have to add this, because he ultimately rose to I think it was GS 18 or whatever, the top level in the government below where you have to have a confirmation hearing.
fantastic.
And
oh my goodness.
it's just an example of being given an opportunity, and went through several different administrations.
So he must have been a very intelligent man.
He was a very smart guy. He was a very smart guy, very thoughtful, very kind man.
So where'd you go to junior high school?
I grew up in the Crenshaw
So did you
neighborhood.
go to Audubon Junior High School?
I went to Audubon Junior High School, and then Dorsey High School, and then skipped down the road to USC.
I remember that you told me once, a long time ago, that your high school counselor had not really prepared you for college. I was just astonished to hear that. But tell me again about that.
Well, those were sort of interesting days. I graduated from high school in '66, so that would have been junior high school in '63, and we moved into the Crenshaw neighborhood in 1959. When we moved in the Crenshaw area, the Crenshaw neighborhood was predominantly Caucasian, and they had a large pocket of Japanese American.
That's
and
where I was also.
Yeah, on Crenshaw by the Holiday Bowl.
Yes.
And so I grew up in that neighborhood, but I saw and personally witnessed, some real negative things. The whole neighborhood was subject to, a lot of, they called blockbusting at that time. And the Dorsey, well, I'll put it this way, just to show you in the length of time, in about a 7-year time span, my brother and sister, my two brothers and I were all in elementary school at the same time. My brother was 6th grade, I was 5th grade, my baby brother was in kindergarten. And we started a school called 54th Street School, which had probably about 500 or 600 kids in the student body there. When we arrived, there were 2 other black kids at the school, and then my 3 siblings, and the rest of the school was predominantly white. Dorsey High School, this is all in the same neighborhood. Dorsey High School, which I graduated from, so this is like '66, so from '59 to '66. Dorsey High School had 3,600 students there. My graduating class of 750 had 125 white kids, and it was the last class out of Dorsey with any significant number of whites. They had bailed out of the whole Crenshaw neighborhood.
I remember that Audubon Junior High School was basically white when I went.
Yes. Yeah. And it was the same when I was there. The real change occurred at, I would say, between like 62 and 66. The whole neighborhood flipped. The school flipped. They had an 85% turnover in faculty at Dorsey High School because the faculty also left. And that ties back to your comment about the college counseling. I was student body president in my senior semester. I'd been student body president. The fall semester as class president. I was, most likely to succeed in my graduating class, all that sort of type A achiever stuff. And I was rejected for UCLA, and I had good grades. I was in the Phoebean Society and so forth, because I had not filled all of my college requirements. And the reason I didn't fill my college requirements is because my college counselor gave me poor advice on certain activities that she said would qualify me for, they would give me credit. Specifically, because I was student body president, so student government was actually during a class period every day. And she told me that student government would qualify for one of my government requirements for entering the UC system, and it didn't. And so my application got turned down, and the only two schools...
So it wasn't really, it sounds like it was more something that she didn't understand technically, not necessarily because you were black or anything like that.
It was it seems to me beyond comprehension that the student body president at a school is going to be given bad advice. There were a lot of, white kids in that class, and government as well. I think it was a lack of care about my particular future. And I didn't have neither one of my parents had gone to college. They didn't have the skill to really understand what the entrance requirements were. And that's a pretty basic question. The other thing is, I don't know of any one of my peers that were also active in student government that had the same problem.
So was that your first choice then, to go to UCLA?
It would have been my first choice financially.
Yes.
And so I wound up going to USC, which is the only other California school. I wanted to go to a four-year university. I could have gone to a state college or city college, but I was not going to do that. So I basically went to SC undergrad with no financial aid, because I was a good student, but not perfect. And
that must have been tough for your family.
It was tough.
So did you work during high school or college?
I had always worked. I had
what kind of jobs did you have?
YMCA, young men, YMCA camp counselor. And they had summer camps every summer, and they'd have camps during the spring break, and I was active in the Y, and so I became a Y counselor. And then I had, was the one fortunate scholarship that I did get, the Southern California Gas Company, which they still have a program, the Metropolitan District, it's now Semper Energy, I think, although this is not a promo, had a program where they were giving scholarships to what they call inner city kids. And their scholarships consisted of a small cash stipend, but you would get a summer job all through college.
So you benefited from that.
So I benefited from that. So I knew I had a summer job every summer.
So what did you study undergraduate?
I studied for the first couple years pre-med, and so I took the general ed classes. And
your brother had already done this? I mean, it's your older brother who's a doctor now?
My older brother's a doctor now. My older brother was at West Point at the time.
Oh.
And so they're...
What did I say about such an accomplished family? My goodness.
They get an engineering degree, I think is the basic degree you wind up with there. So he was at West Point a year ahead of me. His is another story, how he wound up a doctor. But I had...
Did you know doctors? Is that why you wanted to be a doctor?
No, I, honest to God, if I had to do this all over again, I would still be a doctor. Even though, the judicial...
Even though it was so tough?
No, just because I think I would have truly loved the work. The judicial career has been wonderful, and I think probably in terms of suitability, it's probably the next best thing I could have done, and
What do you think would
but-
have been so satisfying about being in medicine?
More hands-on service to people, assisting people that have, you know, whatever illnesses or things, if you can, you know, treat them. I just think that would have been a great thing to do. Plus, from a little kid, that's what I wanted to do.
Oh my goodness.
You know, so you never can get that out. But I was.
Well, it's never too late, you know, Candy.
It's too late for no. You know why it's too late? The same reason it was too late in high school and college. I am terrible in math. Terrible in math. I got through a good portion of the pre-med things, and I'm just horrible in math, and that just killed me. All those pre-med courses that have the heavy-duty math requirements.
So when did you change to
my junior year.
Oh boy, then you suffered through it for 2 years.
I suffered through it for 2 years, but I was holding up my GPA with the classes I was taking in English and history and psych and all the other classes, and just struggling with the physics and organic chem and all that other madness that you need for pre-med. And I finally said, you know, you're swimming against the stream here, kid. You know, your GPA, you know, trying to keep my GPA up, and the classes I was doing well in was not those that were going to get me into med school. So I flipped.
So you flipped, and at that point, did you think that you would probably go to law school, or had you not decided?
I hadn't decided that. I flipped to poli-sci because I always had an interest in government and politics. And I'm looking around for majors, and I said, okay, well, you know, math, the whole math and science area, that's out. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, so I wasn't going to go into those kind of teacher preparation type, child development and all of that sort of stuff. I had a general interest in perhaps psychology, but sort of in the same way I was interested in medicine, in the sense of, you know.
So you would have had to go to med school.
To do some sort of counseling type thing, of working with people, but so I said, well, you know, my best class scores were in this area, so I said, well, let me just make this my major.
Were there any particular professors or mentors at that point? I mean, in college, who were encouraging to you?
I have, yeah. There are two that I remember from undergraduate. One was a guy named Fred Krinsky, who was taught Poli-Sci 101 at SC, and he left SC later. I can't remember what year exactly he left, and then he went to Pomona College, where he became professor emeritus of the Poli-Sci department there. And he was also the father of another fellow I got to be good friends with, but he was a really remarkable guy. He was a Reformed rabbi, as well as just a remarkable poli-sci professor and lecturer. And we actually got to be friends and remained friends for many years. He died a few years ago, and I even went to the 50th anniversary of his bar mitzvah, which he gave after the service. He gave essentially a lecture. I mean, he's just a natural born teacher, and he gave a lecture to all the people there about things going on in the Middle East, just from like memory and his own knowledge. And he's just wonderful man, wonderful man. He was a very significant person to me.
Did he inspire you towards law, or just generally?
Just generally, in specific. It turns out his oldest son, who's a partner now at O'Melveny and Myers, a guy named David Krinsky, turned out was in my law school class, and we got to be good friends, and he and I are still friends, and his family. And he was in my study group all through law school, and that was one of the reasons I was able to stay connected to Professor Krinsky, was through the what then became family connections.
So did you enjoy law school?
I loved law school. I hated undergraduate school, except for a course here or there.
What was it about law school that was so different from undergraduate?
Well, SC undergraduate in the 60s was a wasteland for black kids.
How was it socially for a black
A
student?
wasteland. They
What
had,
kind of percentage of minorities were there?
oh,
Negligible?
negligible. If I remember correctly, at one point, I think we sort of did a head count, and there was something like 125 African American undergraduates at SC during my early years, and a fair number of those were on the football team. And it's true.
That makes me laugh.
It's true. I started SC. Mike Garrett was playing football. I was there through all of O.J. Simpson's playing years, and when I left, Lynn Swan was playing football for when I left law school. So athletes, a lot of, not a lot, but a good number of black athletes, and not that many kids in the academic programs.
So what did that mean for your social life?
It meant you had to go elsewhere, basically, in terms of social life. But not so much social life. I never really worried about that too much. But what really discouraged me is having come from a high school atmosphere where I was just super active and engaged and involved in everything. You got to SC in the 60s, and the sorority and fraternity system was running the school, undergrad. And it was...
And there weren't any for you, were there?
No.
Yeah.
No, they only had one African American woman that I knew to be a member of any sorority on the row. It was not one of the elite sororities, and she was so fair-skinned I doubted that they knew she was black. And I went and applied after my first year. I'd done, well, for a couple of service organizations, not the sororities, which I regarded as social, and was turned down. And
Did they give you any reason?
no,
Oh, they didn't have to either.
no, they didn't have to give a reason.
So that
But
must have been-
my suspicion was, because I remember I went to one of the group's offices to turn in my application, and as I handed it to, and it was another student that was there, she said, "Oh, well, you have to have a B average to apply to this group."
Assuming, of course, that you didn't.
Assuming that I didn't. And I was rejected for that group also. And so I spent about a year or so trying to fit in, and then I forgot about it. And I was a commuter student anyway, so
You lived at home. You
I
mean?
lived at home.
Yeah.
And
Were you
so-
able to talk about these kinds of rejections with, I mean, I call them rejections,
They
but
are.
were you able to talk about them with your parents? Or was it something that you didn't really want to share because you didn't want to hurt them to be
They
hurt or sad?
had actually, my dad, it was around this time that my dad had changed jobs and they had moved to Washington D.C.
Oh, I see.
And so I was on my own during that time. But it did sour my whole undergraduate sort of years. The other professor that I remember real well that made a significance to me was an interesting fella who had an oddest name. His name was Shimshon Zelniker. And he was a visiting professor from Israel. And I took a class in comparative civilization class from him. And I remember we wrote papers, and at the end of the year he said, "I want to see you in my office, talk about your paper." And so I came in, and we talked about the paper for a little while, and then he asked me, he said, "Why are you here?"
You mean at USC?
At USC. I said, "What do you mean, why am I here?" He said, "Why are you here?" He said, "This is just a breeding ground for upper middle class white kids. They're all just here looking for husbands and wives, and why are you here?" And he said, "I don't understand it." And so I kind of, went through, why I was there. And he said, "Well, you're really," and, he gave me positive feedback about what he thought my talent and skills were. And said, you really, don't be discouraged, about anything that's gone on here. There are other places that are more receptive.
Did you ever think about transferring over to UCLA or something like that?
I had left SC for 1 year. My junior year, I went to University of Maryland because my folks had gone back during my sophomore year. So when my dad left LA and got this job with the government. And I went back to live with them, and I went to University of Maryland, and I kind of got out of the frying pan into the fire in terms of colleges.
In what way?
Well, University of Maryland at that time was even further in the Dark Ages in terms of racial issues than USC was in the 60s. I went to a football game at Maryland, and all the black kids were sort of sitting together in one section, and Maryland had its own group of cheerleaders, and they were all white cheerleaders, and without being too racist and non-PC, they really didn't have a lot of rhythm. And so the black kids, none of having no cheerleaders on the cheerleading squad, we did our own cheers, right, in rhythm. And up in the bleachers. I mean, we were not anti-school. We were just, we just had our own thing. So I remember being at this football game, and the cheerleaders, were doing their thing, and then when they weren't doing theirs, then the black kids in the own section we had made up our own cheers. It kind of had a beat, and we've got pelted with ice and cups and debris from the other kids in the stands. I thought, oh, this is very interesting.
You stayed there a year?
I stayed there a year. And then the cheerleaders came out with about a 16 by 20 foot Confederate flag during the halftime. That was sort of a message. And then the other, I think, significant issue at University of Maryland is they had a home ec or department. They might be exactly the name, but they had a department dealing with, I guess, teaching at that point, transitioning to more modern sounding things like nutrition and so forth. And they had a government research grant where they were going to provide food to kids. They wanted, and it was a dietary study of some sort. And I know it was federally funded because that was part of the issues. Anyway, it was open to everybody on campus, undergrads. You had to be between a certain age, and you come in, and they would feed you 3 meals a day, and then I guess they were going to, check your vitals and so forth. And being as most of the black kids on campus were a little bit broke and thought, hey, this sounds like a pretty good deal, a bunch of them went to sign up, and they were all turned down. Every last one, except, again, one very light-skinned girl that lived in the dormitory. And everybody put their heads together and said, what in the world is happening? Everybody got turned down. So we had a picket at the home ec building, and the head of the department came out with a 1930-something University of Mississippi Medical School article that said that the blood of African Americans was different than the blood of whites, and therefore we couldn't participate in the study. So I left Maryland after 1 year and came back to SC. I thought, Lord have mercy, this is really pathetic. So anyway, came back to SC, graduated that year, and then wound up surprising myself by accepting an offer to go to SC Law School, which was for financial reasons, because I finally got a scholarship.
So
they gave me a wonderful scholarship that for the full time I was there, that made the difference, because I had partial scholarship offers from some other law schools, but SC I had a full scholarship, and so I thought I'd suck it up and stay.
And you did so well at law school.
I
mean,
did.
You were on the law review.
Yeah, I did very well at law school.
And
Law school was
as you
totally
said,
different.
You loved it.
I loved law school for a variety of reasons. One is, for the most part, the attitude in the law school was totally different than the undergraduate school. They had a commitment to diversity. They really didn't care much about your background. It was pretty much a meritocracy in terms of, class participation, grading, and everything else. I also was excited by the content of the subject matter, and for the first time in college, really studied and liked what I was doing, and as a result, did well and met other terrific people, that became, lifelong friends. And so that was as negative as the undergraduate experience was, the law school experience was good all around.
So what was the minority population at that point in the law school at
Um,
USC?
The entering class was a little over 100, and I think there were 7 blacks in my, no, 6. 6 blacks in my entering class. And SE actually has, because it's a private institution and not subject to the Prop 209 things, has been able to maintain its minority student representation, and I think now is probably one of the most diverse law schools in the country. They have minority enrollment has stayed around 30% every
I
year.
read some remarks that you had made, I think it was in a law review in tribute to Scott
Bice?
Bice
Mhm.
when he was retiring, and you were commending him and his work
Yeah.
to create a diverse student body.
Well, we had, SC has had a real, during a number of years, had very stable dean situations. The dean when I started law school was Dorothy Nelson, who's on the Ninth Circuit, and she was a very, very wonderful person, very kind woman, and she left as dean, I think, I don't know if it was my 2nd or 3rd year in law school, I forget now, and Scott Bice, who was then a very young professor, became the dean, and he was then dean for the next 19 years. And I've stayed active with the law school there, been on the board of counselors, was chair of the board of counselors at one time, and stayed very active with the law school.
So what was the first year of law school like for you? Was it immediately exciting?
Yes. Yeah. Was immediately exciting. It was, you know, I like verbal type exchanges, and, you know, the kids are clever and funny, and the professors are, some are clever and funny and some are not, but the ones that aren't entertaining or challenging. And so even if the class was somewhat hideous, you had your friends to laugh about it. And we have, you know, I think probably everybody who's gone to law school has funny stories about law school, and that was sort of the paper chase style of teaching at the time. And there were teachers that were better at it than others, but when you make friends, that you sort of can survive anything.
So would you consider that a really wonderful 3 years of your life, the
Yeah.
law school
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah,
Then-
very much so.
Immediately after that, you get hired by one of the most prestigious law firms in Los Angeles, and I mean, just looking back, I know that was a time when there were very few minorities, and particularly minority women being hired by those law firms.
Yeah.
So where'd you go, and how'd that come about?
I went to law firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. I had summer clerk the second summer for O'Melveny and Myers, and I had an offer to go there, and then interviewed in the fall with a variety of firms, and interviewed at Gibson Dunn, and had an offer to go there, and accepted Gibson Dunn. I think sort of grass is greener kind of thing. I kind of had an idea what O'Melveny was like because I had clerked there during the summer, and the Gibson Dunn people sort of rang the right bells, and I accepted their offer and went there. And looking back on it, I don't think it really would have mattered. I just don't think being a lawyer really suited my nature. And being a lawyer in a highly competitive, you know, the sort of Wall Street kind of environment added to that.
What was it about being a lawyer that you think didn't suit your...
I am by nature not an advocate. I'll put it in the negative. Lawyers really need to have a bit more aggression, I think is probably the right word, than I have, and desire to win. And my desire to win is very much related to the merits of the issue. And I have a real hard time fighting for something I don't believe in. And you get into that corporate environment, and I sort of understand doing the best for your client, but it's hard. You need to put heart and soul into it to make it a success at those kinds of places. And
So were you surprised at your feelings about all this at that time, or did you
No.
kind of suspect that this?
Well, the thing about it is I really had no idea, because I didn't know any lawyers growing up, and I certainly didn't know any lawyers at those kinds of firms. And the only lawyer that I remember is, man, you probably met Kathy in your careers, H. Clay Jack.
That's right.
And Clay Jack was a criminal defense lawyer in L.A. He was my father's colleague and peer on the LAPD, one of the ones that had gone. He was the only lawyer I knew. And he was a very flashy criminal defense lawyer. I used to come and see my dad. He'd come to visit the houses, and he was both he and my dad were tall, good-looking African-American men. Good. That was back in the day when you had to be in order to be a police officer, you had to be a male of decent size, and they were all both over 6 feet and good-looking, handsome
Yes,
guys.
indeed.
And he'd come visit my dad, and he always wore cowboy boots and a cowboy hat. He had his own style of things, and so he was the lawyer that I knew. So I really didn't know what these law firms did or what the environment was really like there until I went. And
How long did you stay?
I stayed, I graduated law school in '73. I took the summer off and went to Germany, won the TWA ticket again.
You lucky girl.
I know. Didn't come back until I passed the bar first time. I found out in the fall, but I didn't come back to the States until January. So January '94, I started at Gibson Dunn. And then I stayed there until I was appointed to the bench in 1980. But
6 years.
Yeah, 6 years.
And I had no idea that you were only 32 until I saw your materials. That you were only 30 when you were first appointed.
31.
31?
Yeah, I hadn't turned 32 yet.
Oh my
It
goodness.
was the year. I turned 32 that year, but later.
Oh, I see.
So now
You
I was
must have been one of
31.
the youngest judges. I remember people talking about Eric Younger being so
There are very
young.
few other judges that were
That
judges
young.
that young. I know Eric Younger was one, and I think Ron George, Chief, may have been quite young when he first went on the bench, but not. It was hard to get on. That meant going straight,
That meant going immediately. You had to have 5 years.
you had to
at
have
that
5
time
years, and
to
so
go
I
into
had.
the municipal court.
Yeah. So that meant you went on the bench very quickly after. I think I'd been a lawyer a little over 6 years when I went on the
How
on the
did
bench.
how did you apply? And I mean, what encouraged you to
Oh,
apply for the bench?
that is actually an interesting story. That's going to bring two names in that everybody is going to be familiar with. Once I got out of law school and became a lawyer, I instantly went back to my activity level of being a joiner of things and became a bar junkie. And became a member of California Women Lawyers of Los Angeles, Black Women Lawyers, all the bar groups that I could belong to. And for Women Lawyers of Los Angeles, I chaired the committee that did judicial evaluations for folks that were interested in order to get WLA's endorsement. And I had chaired a bunch of different committees, but that was the one I was chairing at this time.
And were you doing litigation work?
No.
No. Okay.
For 2 of the 6 years that, or about 24 months, maybe a little more, the time I was at Gibson Dunn, I actually lived in New York and Minnesota working on a single antitrust case. So I was gone for a little over 2 years out of that 6, which was another different experience. But that was my jaunt in litigation. But I was the most or junior lawyer out of about 12. So we would get to go to court occasionally and watch the senior lead litigator argue, but Other than that, no, I had no litigation. The rest of the time I was in the corporate department at Gibson Dunn. Anyway, where was I now?
So you chaired a committee evaluating
I chaired a
judges
committee
for
evaluating
lawyers.
judges, and at that time, this is now late 70s, and at that time Jerry Brown was governor and had started appointing more women to the bench. And so I was interviewing a lot of women and some men that wanted to get that endorsement. And I was interviewing also women that wanted to be elevated from unit to superior. And whether these were DAs or PDs or wanted to become judges or women that wanted to be elevated, the judges loved their work. And the women that were litigators that wanted to become judges were all just, I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And I believed them. You know, I thought, this really sounds great. And, you know, and I was reading their, you know, their PDQs and interviewed a lot of different people. And I thought, this really sounds, so I got intrigued by the idea. I had not filed anything myself. I was, you know, still struggling over at GD&C, trying to fit in and make that work. And I went to lunch, and I remember who was there. It was Veronica Macbeth, who retired from LA Superior Court, a woman named Catherine Vaughn, her name was Tooks at the time, who was a local lawyer, Kathy Tooks, and we were all in BWL. And we had lunch with Vano Spencer.
BWL being Black Women Lawyers.
Black Women Lawyers. And we had lunch with Vano Spencer and Joan Dempsey Klein. And they said to the three of us, they said, we know that Jerry Brown is interested in appointing more women to the bench and more minorities to the bench.
And were they still on the municipal court at that time?
This would have been in 79, and I don't recall. I know Vano went on, I think they may,
Seems to me when Vano Spencer was involved in starting the National Association of Women Judges, she was still on the municipal court.
Well, I know somewhere right around that time she was elevated, because I remember going to a large party for her, and it was all around the same time. Whatever position they were in, they were the acknowledged leaders of the women lawyers in the state at that time. And I think all these things were going on around the same time. And so the pitch was, because I was the president-elect, or Vicki was the outgoing president, anyway, we're all active with BWL, is we want you guys to help us recruit some women to apply to the bench. And they said, oh, by the way, are any of you interested? And Catherine said no, and Vicki said no, and I said, yes, I am. And so I applied, and they were both very supportive with that application, and actually from then on, because they're just are very supportive of women that apply.
How long was the process before you got the telephone call?
It took a while. It took a while. It was, you know, it didn't zoom through, but I'm pretty sure it was 6 months to a year from that date that I was actually appointed to the bench. I think my first appointment was April of 1980.
And who was the appointment secretary? Was it Tony Klein at that time?
Yes, when I was finally appointed, it was Tony Klein. I think it was someone else when I first started, I think, but it was Tony Klein, yeah.
So what was your first assignment on the court?
Traffic court. And I was really quite happy with that, because I had not, having not been a litigator, I hadn't gone to court. The only time I had gone to court prior to my first day on the bench to litigate something, I had gone to court with a cousin, a younger cousin of mine, who wanted a divorce. And I went down with her to help her get an uncontested divorce. And I researched this thing. I had about an 8-page script, which started with How long have you lived in the county? After the name and everything, I was going to establish, jurisdiction in the county. They had lived in the county. I asked about 2 or 3 questions, and I don't remember the name of the judge
Who stopped you?
who stopped me and asked the 3 questions that he needed to know, and it was over. And I had gotten all dressed up. I had gotten a suit. I was so nervous. My knees were shaking. And I sat for a little while and listened to a couple of other divorces. And there really was, it was the difference between somebody going in on a criminal case and not waiving arraignment, on a 25-count indictment. I was about that inept. So that was my one litigation experience. So I didn't know what I was doing.
How long were you? That's a great place to start. I started there.
It's a perfect place to start.
How long were you in the traffic courts building?
I wound up being there for a couple of years because they made me supervisor, which is their way of sneaking people into keeping lousy assignments. But I really didn't mind it because I also then started doing court administration stuff, which I wound up liking all the way through my career. And I was not able, it's sort of like the doctor's thing, do no harm. I wasn't able to do much harm to anyone down in traffic court. There was a great place to learn, and learn. Learn. I did the cases. If they do go to trial, they're also similar factually. Everybody had 2 drinks, and then they failed their FSTs. That's field sobriety tests for the non-initiated. But so you really couldn't do anything.
You really were involved in court administration. I mean, after you went on the Superior Court, you were the supervising judge at Santa Monica, which is a significant assignment.
Yeah.
A plum assignment, really,
That
to
was
be in
great.
Santa Monica.
Yeah, I wound up, while on Muni Court, I was in the 2 primary assignments. I was in traffic court, and then after 2 years, I came to CCB, which is where I stayed, Criminal Courts Building, and I wound up doing, actually sort of getting into court administration then. I was supervisor of criminal there on the Muni Court, and my own personal assignment was doing long cause preliminary hearings, which was a great assignment. And so I did those. Those were fun.
How long were you on the municipal court?
From 80 to 88, so like 8 years.
And then when you went to Superior Court, what did you stay in criminal?
I stayed in criminal initially, and then I wound up bouncing around. I was appointed in 88, and in 1990, I got pregnant and had my wonderful daughter, Erin, and she was born in November of 1990. And I took off on maternity leave, and when I came back from maternity leave, I worked Inglewood Juvenile for a few months. And then I got a call from the presiding judge who said, we're not going to put any of our good judges in juvenile anymore, so we're going to transfer you. You can go to either Compton or Torrance. And so I said, well, let me get a map and find out where the heck Torrance is, because I didn't know. And I knew where Compton was, but Torrance was closer to home. So I went to Torrance, and I stayed there for probably about 4 or 5 years, and then transferred down to Santa Monica. And that was where I stayed until I was elevated.
Well, you received acclamation from just about every bar association and organization that exists in Los Angeles. I mean, when I looked at your resume, I saw that you were outstanding trial jurist, named by the LA County Bar in 1992. In 1990, you had been the County Bar's Criminal Court Superior Court Judge of the Year. You were Judge of the Year from the Langston Bar Association. And you also received the Women Lawyers Association of Los Angeles Ernestine Stalhut Award in 1989. I mean, I don't know anyone else who has had so many awards recognizing their work as a trial judge. And I also looked at some of the comments that lawyers had made about you, and read that you are considered one of the most astute, you were considered one of the most astute and wisest judges sitting on the bench. That you were called brilliant, that you, commented that you understood complex cases, that you were super bright, you were even-handed, you were a role model for other judges. You were approachable, you were hardworking. So how did you approach your role as a jurist?
I think I had three things that I always kept in mind. And the first one, which I think all the way through, including my appellate work, is more than anything, I wanted to get it right in that case. You know, it wasn't enough for people to feel like they had been treated fairly. To me, I really wanted it to be, I wanted the right result to happen, no matter what. And so that was always very, very, very important. So I would work for that. You know, that meant you had to stay on top of things in terms of working to not only have people think that they're being treated fairly, but that you're going to get a fair result. That I think played a lot into my success. The other is I just respect people, and so I think one reason that I got a lot of accolades for judicial temperament and behavior is, to me, there's everyone that comes into my court has the same status, and that in terms of the respect that they're warranted out of the box. So if it's a pro per, you know, a homeless person, you know, a police officer, you know, a very prominent lawyer, I mean, the homeless guy is going to get respect from me just like the prominent lawyer. And then I'm going to try to get the right result for everybody. And so I think people appreciate that. I don't know that they do or don't get that elsewhere. I know other judges, you know, have good temperaments too. But I will say this: that mine's not studied. It's not an affect. I truly feel that. And I would even, you get into a situation where, assuming the lawyer or the litigant or whoever it is rational, which is not always the case, but if they are, even if things start off badly, you can talk to them and get it to turn around.
Well, that seems to be the feeling of people who argued cases in Division 8 as well. Mm-hmm. People were looking forward to seeing how this brand new division in Los Angeles was going to develop. And I read comments that they were so pleased at how user-friendly and accommodating and willing to listen that panel was.
We had a great time. We had a great time. Division 8 was absolutely wonderful. Now, you know, I enjoyed my time with you, Catherine, in Division 2. We had a good time.
Well, I enjoyed my time with you.
That was also wonderful. And Division 8, when we put together, and was, you know, Paul Boland and Larry Rubin and myself for the first couple of years, and then Maddie Flyer joined us later. I think the thing about Division 8 is we all had we're very different personalities, but in this respect, I think we're all quite similar, which is, you know, the willingness to give people their due and their due time in court and listen. And we were all rookies, so it was all new and exciting, and, you know, there's an enthusiasm that comes from being new that we all had. I think that kind of was probably reflected in
So
what we did.
There was a lot of disappointment when you decided to retire, Candy. I heard it from so many people.
I'm going to ask you to pause for just a moment while I change tape.
We've been talking about the way that you approached being a judge and the respect that litigants and lawyers have for you and how they've shown it by giving you so many awards. Your colleagues and peers also have this kind of respect for you. I mean, the fact that you were elected president of the California Judges Association back in 1988, that was, from what I know now, that was when you first went on to the Superior Court. How did you begin your activity with CJA right away when you became a municipal court judge?
Not immediately.
Because that is an organization where you go by
Yeah, you have to
steps.
work your way up.
Right.
That one was a case of mentoring. Robert Weil became a friend of mine, really led me into CJA and showed me the ropes. And he became a president of CJA, was also a very active guy. And at one point, this was very early on, at one point I was on Muni Court, and I don't know that I knew Bob all that well, but there was going to be an annual meeting that was going to be in the LA area or San Diego, or perhaps, it must have been in LA area. And Bob said, I want you to get active in this organization, and you need to get some visibility, and you need to meet people. He said, so I want to appoint you as chair of the committee that organizes the seminars for the annual meeting, or might have been a summer meeting, whatever. And he said, that way you'll sort of run the conference and you'll get to meet a lot of people, and I think you'll enjoy it. And I did. And so I did that committee, and then I think I chaired some other committees, eventually went on the board, which is about a 3-year term, and then the 3rd year was elected president of the association. But Bob Weil got me active in CJ and kind of really truly showed me the ropes. Said, you need to do this and you need to do the other, those are the steps.
It's really important to have mentors.
Very
isn't
much
it?
so. Very much so. I mean, you can do it on your own, but there are ways. There are shortcuts of a sort, and by shortcuts,
encouragement also.
Yes, absolutely.
It's about understanding that something is possible.
Understanding that something is possible, and also there's a validation that you get. The one thing that I remember most from my early years of judging is before there were a lot of more women and others on the bench, and you may have experienced this, Kathy, as well. Before you established a reputation and people knew who you were, you'd walk into every single situation with 0 on your scorecard. And you had to reestablish your credibility every single time.
And sometimes it was a minus on your scorecard.
Sometimes it would be a minus on your scorecard.
Just by looking like you did.
Because everybody wasn't receptive. And so you had to, you were constantly having to prove yourself, establish your vitae and so forth. Eventually that ended, but that went on for a very long time.
I remember at every meeting of CJA, or you were present, you made remarks, and you were all up and down the state that year.
Yes.
Did you enjoy that year?
CJA president was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. There's very good staff support. They had a woman named Connie Dove, was the executive director of CJA at that time, and for a small organization with small staff, and I think there was only 4 or 5 full-time employees for the organization, they did an enormous amount of work on behalf of the judges and gave the president a great deal of support. Court-wise,
how did it impact on your court work?
Court-wise, at that time, you didn't get any break. So you maintained your normal calendar, and you also absorbed all of your expenses.
You had to pay for everything yourself.
Everything yourself. They would cover a couple of the meetings were paid
tough.
for, and otherwise you were paying for a lot yourself. That has subsequently changed because I think there were some lower judges after me that complained about that. So
That would be very tough, because I saw you at every meeting.
we were at a lot of things.
And didn't we, as judges, get subsidized for
You
going
would
to
get
these?
the annual meetings,
And that was
and the
all?
semi-annual
I
meetings.
don't remember anymore.
But not these committees, the meetings that would go on up and down. When I became president, the organization picked up some of that, but the years that I was on the board, you're working your way up. The judges, the court would pay for the annual meeting, and maybe the semi-annual meeting, but all the other committee meeting things that you would go to, you were on your own for those.
You've been pretty active with the Judicial Council committees as well, haven't you? What are some of those committees that you've participated with?
And I'd actually have to look at a list. There've been so many, but the Chief Justice George has, in addition to appointing me to the Judicial Council, I did a term there, also a number of different advisory committees and boards.
I saw that you were on the Racial and Ethnic Bias in the Courts Committee, the Commission on the Future of the Legal Profession.
Yeah. And those, I was on an early one on private judging. It was really pretty interesting. But a variety of those, and
So you've really been called upon by the chief to play a leadership role in judicial administration throughout the state.
I'd like to think that was right, yeah.
One of the most significant, it seems to me, was your chairing the 50th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. There was a statewide symposium in Sacramento, and I remember attending that extraordinary conference.
And it was great.
What were your thoughts in planning that symposium?
That one was very much of a collaboration with the members of the committee. The chief decided, and I really truly have the greatest respect for Chief Justice George. I think he's been a visionary and for the court, and a man really dedicated to some fine things. But it was his decision that this court, California court, should acknowledge the 50th anniversary of the Brown v. Board of Education decision. That was not, I didn't initiate that idea, but he asked me to chair the committee to design the statewide what the court was going to do in recognition of that. And there was a very terrific board, a committee put together to assist me with that. But the showpiece of the work that we did a variety of things that were educational and making information available to courts throughout the state. I'd really have to go back over all the things we did, but the real showpiece was the symposium. There was a conference that was held that had a variety of speakers and just dealing with the overall topic. And I know we had Juan Williams from National Public Radio, who had written a biography on Thurgood Marshall, and we had some of the original, I know a man who lives in Pasadena was one of the Little Rock, one of the kids that integrated the Little Rock schools, and he was one on a panel, and just a variety of subjects. And we had a very, very interesting symposium.
You know, Candy, I couldn't help but think about how your life was reflected in this period of time, because you were born just a few years before that decision was made.
Yes.
Things have changed so dramatically over these last 50 years, and you know, your accomplishments, the way that the position that you've been able to achieve, sort of all reflects this kind of change and historical change that's gone on in the United States. So I found that just to be remarkable that you
I mirrored
worked
that
on
era pretty well.
You really did.
Yeah, I mirrored that era pretty well. And yeah, because things have changed dramatically since I was a child. It's not like this was something my parents told me about. I remember watching the civil rights movement on black and white TV, and the Montgomery March and Martin Luther King, and
the Watts riots in your neighborhood.
Yeah, the Watts.
I remember that too.
The Watts riots were right in my neighborhood. My dad was on LAPD at that time, and I can remember we lived in kind of in a hilly area, And I can remember looking out our window and seeing LA burning, and not being able to cross Crenshaw because that was the curfew line at that time. So no, those were, and you look back, and I've sort of studied the history of, like African American judges, and until the 70s, there were so few. Maybe one a decade almost. They had Edwin Jefferson and Bernard Jefferson, a couple of the early ones, and then it was, just so few for so long.
No one until Jerry
Yeah.
Brown started appointing.
Yeah, just a few. I mean, here and there, and
For a while after that influx, there seemed to be a real diminution when those people started retiring.
What I have observed, and has been the reason why I have maintained my personal commitment to the whole issue of diversity, is that it seems that absent a commitment to the concept of diversity and inclusion, and absent that sort of a desire, that it's a very easy issue to lapse. And my observation has been that Jerry Brown had a deep commitment to diversity and appointed just a large number of minority and women judges during the time he was in office, and that was a personal commitment most of his. He totally changed the face, I think, of the court system. And subsequent to that, we've been working to maintain it. Now, the number of women judges is, I think, no longer a serious issue. But maintaining the number of minority judges, particularly African American judges, has been much more problematic. From talking to some others, that Hispanic judicial appointment numbers have been maintained better. But I personally track the African American numbers, and it's been a process of trying to maintain the representation as opposed to growing a critical mass.
We have a new African American member, or soon to be,
Yes,
of the Court of Appeal.
Yes.
I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him yet, but
well, I've met him. Justice Spencer and I both had lunch with him here at the court when he was applying, and talked to him. This is Jeff Johnson. Talked to him about, encouraged him to pursue that, because I was highly aware. I knew Vena was going to retire, and whether she knew I was or not, I knew I was going to be out within a year or so after she retired, and that would have left no African Americans on the court. So we had been encouraging people to apply. And I found out about his appointment right before I left for vacation about 10 days ago, and so I have yet to speak to him personally, but that's on my agenda to make sure I communicate my congratulations. So there's been about one every decade plus, because prior to me, so Jeff is now, this is now 2009, prior to that was my appointment. Prior to my appointment was Leon Thompson.
oh my goodness, that long ago.
Yeah. So that's from the 80s until now.
Now, you mentioned when your beautiful daughter Erin was born back in
1990.
1990. So that makes her now 18.
She
or
is
19.
she is now 18, and all
18.
that entails.
And beautiful, and she's going to be going off to college this year.
She just graduated. My daughter, who is my only child and the joy of my life, as you I think can understand, being the mother of a daughter. She graduated just about a month ago from Marlborough School, and is off to University of Pennsylvania in end of August.
And that was her absolutely first choice for college.
It was her first choice.
It was where her father had gone to school.
Her dad went to law school at UPenn,
Uh-huh.
and that she applied early admission and was accepted, and so we didn't have to finish any of the other applications, and now just found out her dorm assignment about a couple weeks ago, and so now we're doing all of this this stuff. So now I get to go to college again. Yay!
So, kind of as a final question, Candy, what are your hopes and your aspirations for your daughter? What kind of advice are you giving her in this very, very complicated world?
You know, Kathy, that is a wonderful question. I think because things change so much, and because there's so many critical things going on now and just in the world that have a bearing on our everyday lives, my mother's advice to me was much less complicated. You know, basically do your best, work your hardest.
I know.
You know, and now I have no idea what challenges she's going to face, because I don't have any confidence now in what the world's going to be like in 20 years. Hopefully I'll still be here to help give her some advice, but that's a stretch.
But I know you've done everything to prepare her for this. I mean,
I
she's
do,
gone
but
to the best school.
But you know, all I can do is give her values,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and advice, you know, values that I think held me in good stead, and just hope they work in her future, because it is just a vastly different, frankly, and almost scarily different. I'm not you know, somebody, hopefully there'll still be a California in 50 years and someone can look at this thing and sort of reflect on what actually did happen. But, you know, between all the social upheaval and the economic upheaval and, you know, global warming and everything else, I simply have no idea what she's going to face in her life. And I just pray she has a wonderful life and that I give her all she needs.
Well, you've been an incredible role model, and I know a wonderful mother. It's been
Thank
great.
you. Thank you, sweetheart. Yeah. Same.